over just that. Uh-oh. I didn't look. Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind, and this time we have another stream highlights edition, featuring a somewhat reasonable balance of duties. And for duty 1, we start with O12N, Omega M and Omega F as Viper. For a general tip for this specific fight is that whenever the boss turns into goop, when it reverts to humanoid form, the male with the spiky hair will always do a circle AoE around him, while the female with the ponytail will always do a knockback. What is important to keep in mind is that, at least as far as I know, you cannot tell from the spread marker and the stack marker which boss will spawn where, and when they do reform, you'd prefer to have as much room to be knocked away from Omega F as possible, both to minimize the risk that you get knocked off the arena altogether, but also avoiding getting knocked straight into Omega M's AoE. The easiest way to resolve this is to simply always bring both to opposing ends of the arena. Or at least at like a 90-degree angle or something, but opposing ends usually works. The spread player goes alone, while the rest of the party goes with the stack. And the moment the goop moves, you can meet in the middle so you can make it regardless of where Omega F spawns. This is quite important as this knockback is almost always the thing that kills or outright wipes groups. The only other tips that go beyond remember to dodge is that when Firewall is cast, make sure to check your debuff to determine which of them you can attack. Usually they will prioritize picking players closer to them, so if there's a light party near each boss, that light party will be the one meant to fight it. And finally, when they use Resonance, move them away from each other if you're a tank. For Viper in particular, at this level, you're in a very awkward spot as the Vicewinder combo does not have the OGCD follow-ups, making it a lot weaker than normal. However, it is worth mentioning that once you have your buffs running, a Vicewinder combo in full is around 10% stronger than regular 1-2-3 combos in terms of potency per second, so you could view it a bit like a 10% damage boost to use. If there are raid buffs, you can try planning around them by using 2 Vicewinder combos in full during bursts and then just 1 on the odd minute or something. Aside from that, make sure to hit those positionals. For duty 2, we went to Flicky Boom Boom as Dark Knight. The main tip I can give here is to remember that all mobs must be killed to complete the duty, and also that many jobs simply don't have or have garbage AoE options here, so the fact Unleash wins on Toe means that, as the tank, it is an extremely good idea for you to be the one over-spamming AoE than anyone else. Although, it may also sometimes be worthwhile to focus the barricades to get a move on if it seems like they're dragging out. For duty 3, we went to Next to the Bootstrap as Pixomancer. It's an outright classic. Whenever we draw these mages, we get this one. All you can really do is fire in red. You can possibly get the run going a bit faster by sprinting and attacking the moment you're in range. Also, getting in some auto attacks might also help? Question mark? For duty 4, we went to Dzemael Darkhold as Paladin. A big tip for the first third of this duty is that with very little defensive cooldown management, it is possible for a tank to pull everything, as long as you tank it in the Crystal Light. Besides, you should stand in the Crystal Light to avoid taking damage from eyes on me while you stand around anyway. And speaking of AoE pulling, Paladin's AoE at this level is insanely high, relatively speaking, and easily wins on 2 targets. A tip for a dungeon-specific mechanic is that the blue Magitech terminal things work in a very specific way. They start a countdown from 20 seconds when someone is standing in them. If players step out of them so it is no longer occupied, the timer resets. Having 2 players inside it halves the timer, but having more than that does nothing. This means that in the later parts of the dungeon where you stand in them in a dangerous spot, someone has to stand their ground or risk resetting them. The only terminal that is different from the rest is the bigger one at the start of the dungeon, as it takes 40 seconds to finish, but the timer is divided by the number of players standing in it, up to 4. For the final boss, take note that the Tank Buster is a frontal cleave, so it is important to point the boss away from your party whenever possible. Additionally, the sudden spin attacks obviously are circle AoEs, so ranged jobs should stay away. And also, remember to attack the crystals. For duty 5, we went to Over the Shoulder Pad as Black Mage. I told you, Mage plus this duty. Best you can do here is Black Mage is open with Fire 1 into Thunder and just spam Fire 1. If you actually run out of MP, just transpose and spam Blizzard and don't bother reapplying Thunder. Even if the upfront damage would be worth it, it takes so long to land that Blizzard would land nearly as fast. If you want to get extra sweaty with it, you could also use an Ether when you can't afford any more Fire 1s to sneak in one more. But really, who would do such a thing? For duty 6, we went to Susano Normal as Samurai. Here, of course, we want to maintain Higanbana as best as possible and use Make Shishui as efficiently as possible to get as many Midares as we can. If you really want to push the optimization in a party with raid buffs, you can also do tricks like waiting with using your EI Jutsu until the next GSD will generate a Sen. That way you have an about 5-second window of delay in case a raid buff is incoming. Another thing you can do is pooling Kenki. As Iki Shoten is not yet acquired in this fight, there won't be any sudden Kenki gains, so as long as you stay below 90, you won't overcap suddenly. Although, leading into each intermission, try to make sure your gauge is close to empty, as these are excellent times to use Meditate. A tip for the particular boss fight as well is that when you get targeted with the orange spread marker, make sure you have 10 Kenki so you can knockback cancel the knockback. And also, try to make sure to aim that knockback in the direction where most of your party is, as it is followed up with a very slim safe spot, Hot Wings quote-unquote style AoE. A final tip is that, as I recently learned from all of you, when Susano jails a player, the jail that contains the player will always be at the bottom of the enmity list. So if you simply target that, you don't need anyone to help you find it, or even look at the shuffling to get it right first try. For duty 7, we went to Castrum Meridianum as Sage. Remember, Dyscrasia is a gain on 2, and even if the dot is very slightly better on 2, it needs to fully tick out to beat Dyscrasia, so maybe just Dyscrasia spam. Overall, I would say the duty took about average time, although I have had faster runs. But near the end of the duty, both the tank and the dragoon started wondering why things were slow, and this was when I noticed the Black Mage making some minor mistakes. It is worth pointing out that the Black Mage was playing decently well and was in fact using their toolkit, and was a returning player, so we can only ask so much. However, to highlight the specific details that stood out to me, on AoE they were using F2 and B2 quite a lot, which itself is fine, sure. There are fancy ways to avoid Blizzard 2 altogether, and more than one Fire 2 per loop is not great, but I don't think I saw them use Flare at all, which was what really hurt their damage on AoE. The second thing I saw was that they would use Scathe rather randomly here and there, which is a minor detail. On single target, they would often also recover MP by casting Blizzard 3 in Umbral Ice, and out of combat they would never use Umbral Soul. Although it is possible they didn't have it on their pass if they returned after Umbral Soul was put at a lower level. Anyway, in my opinion, this was a very average pace run of Castrum Meridianum, so I just mostly found it funny that it was noticeable at all. For duty 8, we went to Anamnesis and Anyder as Astrologian. Unfortunately, I am not the strongest at Astrologian, and so easily get distracted from boss mechanics to manage my toolkit. This causes some problems on the first boss when we have the spinning arrow mechanic. I take note of when the arrow is slowing down, but don't realize that I parked myself at the wrong spot, and the sprouts in the party trusted me to get it right. This promptly leads to both of the DPS dying. While I eventually managed to get the party back on track, I am down to fumes on MP. Partly due to not making proper enough use of my own toolkit, which got better throughout the duty at least. We do manage to turn things around and win without a wipe in the end. Here's a tanking tip about these packs with diviners in them. The diviners are wholesale, all-in ranged mobs that will not come to you. The problem there is that there are several diviners across the 3 packs here, and if you just run to the last pack straight, these mobs will spread all around. One way you can resolve this is to heavily overshoot and run past the last diviner, and then come back once all the diviners are stacked. Another way is to make use of the corner leading up to the area to line of sight the diviners from the previous packs. Moving on, things go decently well on the second boss, although the bard dies due to a combo of floor markers and spread markers. For the final boss, a tip I've given before is that leading up to the grates mechanic, start leaning towards one quadrant of the room, so your party can spread out evenly and intercept all 4 splashing grates. While this party missed some of the first grates, with my, one-liner advice, we nailed the second set, and I didn't even mention needing to dodge the hangs. Overall, a bit of a slower run, but a fun one. For duty 9, we went to Tender Valley as ninja. Aside from me being silly and forgetting to use Bunshin right at the start of the duty, the run went super well. It is just Tender Valley. The second boss can be a bit hectic if the triple bombs overlap with your burst, and paying attention to both the bombs, which lines to watch for, and your rotation can be a bit overwhelming sometimes, especially with melees needing to consider which spots work. On the final boss, a possible useful tip for ninjas is that if your burst happens to overlap with the greatest labyrinth, or maybe your application of Suiton does, then try to plan some of the ranged part of the burst, or the cast of Suiton, for when you step on the arrows so you don't lose too much damage by being out of range. Usually, the fight is close enough to over that deliberately messing up the order of your burst for this one thing doesn't matter, as there won't be another 2-minute burst anyway. Near the end, there's also a slime performing stack markers. Some live chatters asked me what the remaining goop on the floor does. If you stand in it for like a second too long, it puts a nasty dot on you. That's it. For duty 10, we went to Friendly Dance Clubs as Summoner. This is a very awkward level range for Summoner, as you just barely don't have any AoE, and your spells are either a bit too weak or way too strong in the case of Ruby Ruin and Ruby and Topaz Kabis, so you tend to either need to cast too many spells or one spell overkills one thing. For the sake of comparison, a Dancer's standard finish into Windmill can 2-shot this pack of Spriggans, but we still make it through reasonably fast, of course. For duty 11, we went to Local Hobby Club as Dragoon, and Fern is here. All you can really do here is accept the fact that you will only get 1 life surge and send it on the Gobbie with a Vorpal Thrust. Aside from that, 1-2s for everyone. For duty 12, we went to Dark Nail Polish as Monk. 2 levels short of Deep Meditation, so we get 1 Steel Peak for the entire fight. Better make it count. Aside from that, all we can do is press the glowy button while respecting positionals. Don't forget about True North. If the boss forces you out with a circle AoE, remember that stuns also work, although take note that you probably only get 1. For duty 13, we went to the 4th trial of Dawntrail. If you don't want to see it, jump to this timestamp here. That said, we of course went to Recollection as Reaper. I feel like I have gone over the whole 2-minute double in Shroud thing a few times recently, so aside from the fact you should really make the 1 Harvest Moon you get count, let's focus on some boss mechanics this time. Although, a funny thing we got a bit caught up in during the fight on stream was the observation that while the voiceover sometimes explains what you need to do for a mechanic, a lot of the time it's just random fun facts. Imagine if the actual bosses did that more. Instead of shouting a threat or something at you, they just go, "Did you know that I eat rice porridge for breakfast on Tuesdays?" For that confusion damage factor. Now, for the actual boss fight tips. The Alexandrian Thunder 4 inner circle AoE is just barely shorter than max melee range, so position yourself smartly and don't lose uptime. This applies during the entire fight. For the second tip, there is a forced cutscene almost exactly 2 minutes into the fight, so if your 2-minute cooldowns are coming up there, hold them and wait. After the cutscene, it will be safe to let it rip for the rest of the fight. For the phases where she puts flowery patterns on the floor, take note that any AoE explosions touching those areas will cause the whole section to explode. Also, take note that stepping through the middle of the arena during those sections will almost certainly kill you with the dot it applies, so don't do that. When she summons an orb in those sections, make sure to step away from the safe area that orb is approaching, as it will make that area unsafe too. And the flowery patterns connect to each other, so a single AoE touching one flower cone will also count any nearby flower cones. Around halfway through the fight, we had nearly half the raid die to a summoner running through the middle and a tank and healer getting smacked by a half-room cleave overlapping with the flower cones. For the baited blue circles that linger, I guess it should be obvious, but it makes a lot more sense to try and place them outside melee range to give more room for everyone to dodge. With all these things in mind, it should be reliably possible to beat the fight without ever being forced out of melee range, and without requiring too much attention to dodge while you do your 2-minute bursts. And we of course made it through in the first try. For duty 14, we went to Alexandria as Bard. Funny how the jobs I find difficult to play in high-level dungeons get the high-level dungeons, and the ones I find easy get guild tests. A thing I've started to do on the elephant mob just before the first boss is to pretty much always just send my 2-minute burst on it. In my experience, most other players hold theirs, which means it takes an eternity to kill. But just one DPS going all out tends to wrap the fight up quickly, and it usually doesn't matter much for the rest of the duty anyway. Especially not when the rest of the party don't have raid buffs you could align with anyways. Presumably, eventually, the Paladin's Fight or Flight will align naturally again, for instance. We dealt quite reasonably well with the first boss with only a small mistake here and there, including overlapping a stack marker with a tank buster, but also including the tank accumulating 6 Vuln stacks. On the second boss, we had a bit more mistakes. For instance, I start the fight forgetting to apply my second dot initially. And, while the tank ends up with a paralysis debuff multiple times, not once do I bother to use Warden's Paean on them, although the Sage helps them each time. Near the end, the Viper also dies. The rest of the dungeon goes just fine. A tip to help manage Bard a bit easier if you're having trouble is to manage your dots whenever you switch song. This isn't optimal necessarily, since you want to dot snapshot and whatnot, but it is better to have your dots running than not running. It also only helps so much in a dungeon context where you might not want to apply your dots on AoE, for instance. But making sure you switch songs on time and then reapplying your dots is a way to reduce the amount of things you need to keep track of. For duty 15, we went to Matoya's Relict as Scholar. Fun fact, when I ran this dungeon for the first time when it released back in Shadowbringers, I did it as Scholar too. Now, the party, especially the warrior, knew exactly what to do, so I sort of just autopiloted through most of the dungeon, forgetting to use Ether Pact, barely bothering to use Recitation and so on, and because the party was solid, I wasn't really punished for it. One thing of note is that the summoner was using Rekindle diligently on the warrior, making things even easier. Like, this is the kind of group where you can kind of just hang out as a healer and it just works. You're there if something goes wrong, but it just doesn't. A little bit awkward, and you might feel like you're not doing your part. I maybe felt a little bit like that in hindsight, but we still managed. And finally for duty 16, we went to Hell's Lit as Gunbreaker. In this level range, Gunbreaker's AoE is particularly awkward. No AoE spinders at all. If you want to optimize this, the best you can do is take note that the Gnashing Fang combo wins on AoE against your filler AoE combo on 4 targets, and Sonic Break put on a target that lives the full 30 seconds, good luck with that by the way, does technically win on 6 targets, and can still be worth using to finish No Mercy if the alternative is Demon Slice on up to 8 targets. But again, you know, 30 seconds, it's probably not happening. It can be handy if there's a particularly healthy mob in a pack, and the same applies for Gnashing Fang on more than 4 targets. Overall, this party did great, and aside from some minor mistakes here and there, we pushed through at a reasonable pace. I do wish a well-balanced Mentor Roulette set included a bit less skill tests, but I guess this does somewhat match my own average results. And we have passed 6/13 of the way to the achievement. Soon, we will get to that halfway point. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, originally in Shadowbringers, Gunbreaker's Gnashing Fang combo was 3 separate buttons. Of course, still with 1 continuation button. With Endwalker's launch, this was changed to a single button. Originally, Bloodfest's cooldown was also 90 seconds, but this has changed to 2 minutes sometime in Endwalker. Interestingly, with no compensation, yet may have been appreciated due to the quote-unquote convenience of it.